Honesdale is named after Philip Hone, who was a mayor of New York City at the time that the Industrial Revolution's going on in Honesdale, coal town, is sending all this coal to the Hudson River. He and others were important people in the building and the early years of the canal, which opened, and the first boat took coal in 1828. At that time, Honesdale's the frontier. You go much west of Honesdale and it's just native forest and nobody's living there. So Honesdale truly was a frontier town. Philip Hone, Washington Irving, and two other men. Irving decided that the town should be named in honor of Philip Hone. And Hone decided that it would be a good idea to name the cliff Irving Cliff. In our museum, we actually have the ledger book that says Dyeberry Forks and the work that happened that day on the canal. Dyeberry Forks, and you can turn the page in the ledger book, and all of a sudden, Honesdale's at the top of the page. Not too many people know exactly when and how their community was named, and that's the kind of presence of history here.
Honesdale Borough became a borough back in 1831. It became a borough after 3 tries, actually, and it was formerly called Dyeberry Forks. City Hall is a very old building. It was built in 1890, started building in 1891. They occupied it in 1893, so it is a very old and historic building.
Honesdale became the county seat in 1841, and the original courthouse was opened up in 43, so for 175 years, the area has been the site of the county courthouse. It opened up and the first court was held in May term of 1880, and it's been operating ever since. The Central Park, again, was originally deeded as a town green, and specifically in the deed where it is not to be used anything other than public space. Just a beautiful place to see. There are significant monuments in there. Obviously the Civil War monument. It was one of the first built in the state. It was originally proposed in 1865, just a couple months after the war ended. The combination of the Central Park and the courthouse gives you such a sense of community continuity. You know, it's just another reminder about how, again, we are just caretakers of our culture, and that's been a mainstay of our community and culture since there's been a town.
The Delaware and Hudson Canal Company was part of the canal fever in the United States. So the purpose of the canal company was primarily to make money for these people, but to sell coal, primarily transport coal from the Lackawanna Valley to New York City to fuel the factories there and to heat the homes. Our canal froze in the wintertime for a couple months. Everything stood still. And that's one reason why the coal was continuously mined in Lackawanna Valley, brought here on the Gravity Railroad and piled up in big piles.
It's the longest railroad in the country. In 1830, began right here in Honesdale and ran over the mountain to Carbondale. It was used to transport anthracite from the mines in Carbondale to here in Honesdale, which was the end of the D&H Canal. But in 1898, locomotive technology had improved to the point where the canal was no longer economically feasible for the D&H. So they abandoned the canal and drained it. The D&H, after the canal had been abandoned, built a new passenger station in Honesdale. The big thing that the D&H did here, and what we sort of pride ourselves on, is as the Stourbridge Lion.
So the Stourbridge part of our name comes from Stourbridge, England, or as our really good friends across the pond say, Stourbridge. Now the reason that Stourbridge is so important is that the Lion, that first locomotive to turn wheels on rails here, was built in Stourbridge, England. They had built it in England and then shipped it to America and then operated on the wooden rails of the Gravity Railroad. So that's where we get the Stourbridge part of our name. The Stourbridge Line is a scenic rail excursion here in the northern Poconos. We have 25 miles of track that we run between Honesdale, Hawley, and Lackawaxen. It's like to say we bring people back to the heyday of railroading. All our coaches are vintage from 1920s to 1950s, and the prime of railroading has been lovingly restored. You walk in and I always say you're transformed right back to the heyday. and the scenery's awesome. We follow the Lackawaxen River. We see so much wildlife out along the river, bald eagles, deer, duck, geese, and I always like to say to wild American fishermen every once in a while out in the river fishing.
On the train, we have one trip that's 3.5 hours long. And someone said, well, that's a long train ride. I said, you know what? It forces you to stop and smell the roses. You know what? You're on a train, you're not going anywhere. You're gonna sit, and it forces you to sit back and relax. Just seeing that and seeing people come and enjoy it. We've had veterans on there that come from the VA. I mean, it's just a neat thing to see. People bring 2 and 3 generations with them to come take a ride and then experience the downtown.
Jonas Kotz, my husband's grandfather, he traveled all over the county, and then when he had enough money, as the history books say, he had $200, he opened the store, Katz Brothers, on the main street in Honesdale. Our store we had women's wear, men's wear, we had a grocery. Then they decided to start a factory, and they opened up the factory on the 3rd floor of the store.
They started a company, Katz Underwear Company, in 1898 that existed until 1991. We were in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We were the largest employer in Wayne County. We started out with the 11 people in 1898, and in 1950 we were employing 600 people. We were, without a doubt, the largest family-owned manufacturing firm in northeastern Pennsylvania that was considered a non-union factory.
I was in Beach Lake and I was looking to move into Honesdale to a bigger location. That building was slated for demolition. A bank was going to go in on the corner of Church and 6th, and they were going to take the building, tear it down, and use it for a parking lot. And at that point in time, I just couldn't let that happen, and it was a perfect scenario for me because we had construction experience, so we could move in, we could work on the building, and produce furniture like we do. I just couldn't leave the building empty because I love the community. They really took me in open arms, and I'm part of it, and Honesdale is a great place to be. So I wanted to repurpose the building, to give it back to the public, basically. So I cut the building up, and we do everything in there from laser tag to physical therapy to printing to photography, and we actually have a wedding venue in it.
The Dorflinger factory and the Dorflinger companies were one of the leading producers of luxury glass tableware in America. They produced glass for 8 presidential administrations, many of the wealthiest families in America, foreign governments.
Christian Dorflinger was a glassmaker who came from France, but by the mid-1860s he's established several houses, and he's bringing glass workers over from France, from the same village where he trained. And those descendants of those families are still here. He had made a set of glassware for the White House for Mrs. Lincoln, and that helped establish his reputation for making fine lead crystal tableware. This is what Dorflinger was making in the roughly 1870s to the 1920s, and this is lead crystal. It's an ice bucket. This is a blank. Dorflinger was actually a factory that melted sand and produced glass.
What we're really trying to do is tell the story of the history of the company, the history of its role in this part of Pennsylvania, and also the glassmaking process. So we're as much an industrial heritage museum as we are an art museum.
And the first part of it, when you go in, shows you actually how glass is cut. So you can actually see the tools that they used for blowing and roughing, smoothing, and polishing the glass. The actual tools are all there.
Dorflinger, the property that he bought in the 1862 remained in the family until eventually 1979, when his grandson's widow left it to the community to be used as a wildlife sanctuary. Now it's a 600-acre property with a lake and hiking trails, and it's a beautiful natural setting. This natural setting kind of lent itself to having outdoor concerts. And so that kind of grew into the Wildflower Music Festival, which is about 30+ years, and we partnered with WVIA and many times through the years on that. got right back to the beginning. One thing that we're Dorflinger is kind of proud of, we've partnered with Keystone College, and we've actually created a mobile glass blowing studio that travels to local schools. And we, this year, we finally got it to the Honesdale High School. So we actually had glass blowing happening in Honesdale for the first time in probably since the 1870s or 1880s. So it's interesting, some of the kids, the art students, were able to actually play and manipulate with the glass, the art students there, and I didn't get a chance to check, but I'm positive that at least one or two of those had some connection in their family history to glass making.
Grace Episcopal Church goes back to Philip Hone. He was an Episcopalian. He, in addition to being mayor of New York City, was the warden of Trinity Church, Wall Street. We have the pulpit Bible that Mr. Hone donated when the church was consecrated. There are 8 churches on Church Street: Roman Catholic, Lutheran, Episcopal, Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist, Assembly of God. The smallest Jewish synagogue in America, and it is the cutest place and the warmest congregation.
The Beth Israel Synagogue was started in the 1800s, and 10 men got together and opened the temple, the synagogue. And the landowner of the canal, they donated land all along the canal for churches or synagogues or whatever. The landowner's wife, or the canal owner's wife, insisted that all churches had to have a steeple. So we have the distinction of having a steeple. No other temple in the world has a steeple. And it is one of the smallest temples in the country, one of the oldest in continuous use.
Well, you know, it was interesting because in Honesdale it was muddy streets and very few buildings back in the day. And then after they discovered that burning rock over on the other side of the mountain, that coal, and decided to build the gravity railroad and dig the canal, all of a sudden Honesdale became a real center of commerce. And there were a group of gentlemen who thought, well, if there's going to be a lot of commerce here, there should be a bank. And in 1836, they put together enough capital to form Honesdale Bank at that time. And that was the first bank in the area, and I think it was about the 3rd bank in northeastern Pennsylvania. And then later on, as things progressed and the area built up, other people felt that they needed options, and another bank started. Then the Wayne Bank was brought in, and then after the turn of the century, the Dime Bank started, which was the Honesdale Dime Bank at that time. It was kind of interesting that there were so many independent banks, but at that time that's how banks operated. There were a number of community banks, and people went to certain ones based on what they either did as a business or as to if their parents or grandparents had done business with them.
Well, here we are in the 1800s and getting towards the end of the 1800s, and Honesdale is really a lively town. It's amazing when you read all the little businesses that were going in the town. There was a cigar factory, there were sewing machine factories, there was, of course, glass, there was all the timber going on. So very lively, very entrepreneurial. And naturally enough, people see other hotels going up in the Adirondacks, the Catskills, the Poconos. They say, aha, we have, not only do we have all the scenery that everybody has in the Catskills and the Adirondacks, we've got the mountains, we've got the lakes, we've got a couple of rivers. We have also got a very thriving little town. So naturally, let's put up a hotel. So in the early 1880s, a well-established lawyer, William Dimmick, buys the property that goes right over the cliff. So the idea is to build this wonderful hotel. Anyway, so there we are in May, and we are all ready for this grand opening. Every room is sold. But May 29th, Mr. Almy is going to come to the hotel. So there is Mrs. Almy in the hotel. And when she is walking through these grand rooms, through the grand rotunda, she looks up and she can see what the noise is. It's crackling from a fire. The fire takes 3 hours to burn, and the next morning, it has all gone.
Franklin Haynes, who was the owner and the editor of the Hancock Herald in Hancock, New York. And they got B.F. Haynes to come down here. They gathered up 900 subscribers. And the evening before the newspaper, was first sent out onto the streets, they worked all night. They printed 3,000 4-page broadsheet copies. And on February 7th, 1878, the Wayne Independent was born, and it has printed continuously since then. The Wayne Independent, we're very hyper-local. What we do is we report on local news, and we report on local events, and we report on local people, and we tell their story, from the beginning of their lives with their birth announcement right to the end of their lives with their obituary, and everything in between, be it their wedding, their engagement, the fact that they were a standout sports star, in high school, that kind of stuff. So if you look at it that way, it tells the entire story of a person's life.
In 1875, Honesdale Borough decided that they needed something better than hand pumpers, and they decided to purchase a steam fire engine. The Reefs Pettigrew fire was one of a number of major fires in the town at that time, or in around that period. Fortunately, the steamer was there, and they managed to put the fire out, and that is the only time where there's ever been a Honesdale volunteer fireman who's been lost in a fire. George Bergman died in that particular fire. But it was also 30 degrees below zero on the night that that fire call came in. And when the fire was all over, all of the hose from the Honesdale Fire Department was all frozen in the streets. That steamer, which is the same one that we have in the museum today, was in active fire service in Honesdale from 1875 until 1936, when it fought its last fire.
I'm happy to tell you today about my father. His name was Howard D. Becker. He was well known locally because he was such a prolific artist, and he lived his whole life wanting to draw, wanting to paint. It was not just a hobby, it was his business, it was everything, and he lived and breathed it practically. He rented his own little cottage here in Honesdale towards the end, and when he died, and I decided to count up his paintings and his drawings, and I found as many as 3,700 pictures that he had left me. And they're including oil paintings, watercolors, sketches in his sketchbooks, and that doesn't count how many thousand he may have sold throughout his years. We have no idea, because they seem to pop up everywhere. At least around here, many people have them in their homes or their businesses. To him, he saw artistic value in anything he saw, and he just, that was what was important to him.
General Lemnitzer was born in, I believe, 1898, and he went to West Point, graduated after 2 years with because of World War I. There was a shortage of Army officers, and they rushed his class through. Lyman Lemnitzer commanded a number of different types of units during his tenure. He commanded Patton's artillery brigade in Tunisia. He commanded a division in Korea. But commanding troops wasn't his real forte. The man was an amazing planner. The general went on. He was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, appointed by Dwight Eisenhower at the end of his presidency, and that carried over into the Kennedys. And at that time, when he was mandatory retirement age, and he should have retired. Kennedy asked him, because of his ability to work with Charles de Gaulle, if he wouldn't stay on active duty, and he did. He went on and spent 6 more years on active duty as Supreme Allied Commander in Europe.
Jenny Brownscombe was born here in Honesdale in 1850. So she became an illustrator. She illustrated in Harper's Weekly. Her paintings are now in several U.S. museums. In the Plymouth Hall in Plymouth, Massachusetts. It's entitled The First Thanksgiving. That painting was reproduced in many, many elementary history textbooks. So that is why this image is in our mind of the first Thanksgiving.
I was particularly interested in Winter Wonderland because of my family's connection. My mother was best friends with Dick Smith's sister, Marjorie. They lived across the street from the park in Honesdale on Church Street. And every Christmas, of course, the snow beautifully fills the park and covers all the trees. And that was one of his precious childhood memories. Many years later, when he was sick and in a hospital with tuberculosis, well, during his career as a songwriter, he was looking out the window from the hospital. He saw children playing in the snow, and it brought back memories when he was healthy and carefree as a child. And he started writing out the song Winter Wonderland on pen and paper, a catchy little song that he thought just might make it. When he wrote the song at the hospital, and he was healthy enough, he recovered and got out, he and Felix Bernard, who wrote the melody, they were looking for a publisher in New York City, and 14 different publishers turned them down. Finally, somebody gave them a chance, this young songwriter from a rural town in Pennsylvania. RCA Victor was the first to record the song in the fall of '34. That Christmas was his big break. The famous band leader, Guy Lombardo, introduced the song as his first song on the Christmas show at Radio City Music Hall. Now this show was heard far and wide on the radio, and because of his reputation, Guy Lombardo's, it really helped launch the song. Within the first 4 months, the song sold 250,000 copies. Because of his success, he actually signed a contract to go to Hollywood to write songs for musicals. It was a very tough business when he got into it, and he had a hard time making it, but when he finally wrote Winter Wonderland, he found a song that would last forever.
Sleigh bell rings. Are you listening?
In the lane, snow is glistening.
It's a beautiful sight. We're happy tonight, walking in a winter wonderland.
In the meadow we can build a snowman
and pretend that he is Parson Brown. He'll say, "Are you married?" We'll say, "No, man."
But you can do the job when you're in town.